at what point, what do you think would have to happen for that commitment to lesser of two evilism to break? Do you think Joe Biden so explicitly making these promises that he's now so flagrantly disregarding, on top of some of these media faux pas? I mean, the Kamala Harris Charlemagne interview that went around the world, are the tipping point around student debt in particular that got to such a fever pitch that they capitulated and now have postponed it till May 1st, the moratorium ending. Do you think that this is evidence that they're genuinely concerned about midterms even being a bigger disaster than people have long expected, and that Black voters in particular might be finally willing to start to disaggregate themselves in larger numbers from their fidelity to the Democratic Party?
Well, that's already happening. That has been a slow crawl, over time. There's voices that say don't vote at all, which I don't agree with. But that has been happening. I think, Bree, with when we talk about lesser of two evils, it's the options that people have. And it goes back to the conversation we had in the beginning. And I know you're saying, well, this was the better option. And people say, why won't they just realize that Bernie was a better option or Liz was a better option? Well, there's a reason why when we talk about the left, and again, I'm talking about Black voters right now. There's a reason why you don't see Black people in droves on this side of the camp. And some work needs to be done with that. Two things can be true at the same time. Black people can start paying attention more to policy. They can put forward the best candidate. The lesser of two evil can be the Elizabeth Warren or the Bernie Sanders or whoever's on the left and not the Joe Biden. But there has to be some ownership and getting things done right on this side. It's not that Black people are not there.
What do you think that is? And I want to clarify. I don't think that it's that Black people don't pay attention. Yeah. But I think that they feel constrained in their choices.
Yes,
and
they do.
Are sincerely committed to lesser of two evilism, not out of ignorance, but because of a feeling that they are uniquely vulnerable to the evil.
That's
and
true.
Needing to protect themselves, which I respect. But it also, I think, has these kind of completely expected political consequences in terms of the Democratic Party's unwillingness to actually deliver for the most dedicated voter bloc, which is Black voters, So, I am interested in this question. I am curious about your critique of the left and how they can do a better job communicating, especially in this moment where one might argue this is an opportunity for, encouraging people to do something with their vote other than vote for Democrats. I mean, what do you think about third party candidacies, for instance? I mean, what do you think Black voters or other constituency groups that have been lied to and ignored by the Biden-Harris administration should do to make themselves heard during an election year where they might have more leverage than they ordinarily do?
Yeah, it comes down to the voices that are speaking on the left side. And I can just tell you, Bree, just honestly, because I had this conversation a couple of weeks ago. The 1% conversation, the evil money conversation, the rich people are evil. And I'm generalizing because that's not it in general, literally. Black voters, remember, and I won't say overall, but Black people at one time were Trump was in all of our hip hop music. Black people want money. They want to be rich. They strive for wealth. And there's a big difference between the self-employed Black person that runs a business versus the barely middle class versus the greed of the Amazons. And what I have seen on the left side is the message about the Amazons and the Elon Musk and the 1% and this and that, and nothing about how, and I get in this debate all the time with folks on the left, white people particularly on the left. If I say something that is pro small business, that's capitalism, it's all evil, and this shouldn't be a part of this capitalism side. That has been survival to Black people. It's been our survival. When my grandmother was in an abusive relationship, and she didn't have anywhere to go. Nobody would hire her. She's 90 years old now. She was a beautician. She was able to get out of her abusive relationship because of her self-employment. She married my grandfather, who was self-employed. They built a life because nobody would hire them. They had to get it for themselves. My mother had 10 self-employed positions. She worked at the television station, but she had 9 other hustles, Bree. She did hair. She sold real estate. She sold Herbalife. She sold self-employment. To Black people is literally how we've been able as a collective community to survive. And what I have, my own personal experience, not everybody else, that is never talked about on helping small businesses. It is never talked about, or not enough. It is all about, let's just tear down all the rich folks. And once we do that and they pay their taxes, the money's going to trickle down and all the boats will be lifted and the tide lifts all boat, whatever that is. And that's just simply just not true.
Well,
and that's, and let me just finish.
Please.
I'm not saying that's not the reality of it, Bree, but I'm talking about the messaging, how it lands.
Yeah.
It's all about how it lands. And that is not, it doesn't gravitate to, you can cut out all of the folks that, they just don't know and they just haven't read up, or, they're just used to following Jim Clyburn and they've done that for generations and I agree with all of those things can be done at the same time. But there is a section also of Black people that do not want to, every time they try to bring up a question about identity, that the answer is always counter to class. Yeah. And the left does that. They do that all the time, at least the folks who are engaging online.
Yeah, I mean, I have observed the phenomenon that you're describing, and I wouldn't dispute it. And I'm curious, I remember during the campaign, there was a moment when Bernie's labor policy came out, and one of my frustrations was that there wasn't really a coordinated effort to make sure that there was a social media push that celebrated the great policies that were coming out and explained to people why it mattered to them. And so no one wanted to do anything about the labor policy because it sounded dry. So I remember reading it and realizing it was the most radical, interesting part of anything that we had released so far and committing to do that video. And one of the things I found myself ruminating about was how much the Bernie socialism narrative didn't emphasize enough worker ownership, right? And when I hear you talk about Black voters, Black people's commitment to entrepreneurship and the ways in which being self-employed has been a safeguard against a racist and hierarchical economic system, I think about how labor advocacy, union participation, which we all know was racially discriminatory and flawed historically and all of that, but has been a huge benefit to disproportionately Black workers for those same reasons. And I wish there was a world where when we said, socialism, to the extent that we should be saying socialism, what springs to mind is not, state ownership, but worker control in a way that is kind of entrepreneurial in nature. The idea that you can take the reins from the people that have been oppressing you, whether for racial reasons, economic reasons, gender reasons, all of the reasons why workers are oppressed. And I wonder if that sort of narrative that had been emphasized more, or if it were emphasized more going forward, could resonate with some Black folks.
Well, I think, two can be done at the same time. There's never a shortage for conversations on the worker on the left. So I hear what you're saying, like they could have framed it different, but there is never a conversation about entrepreneurship on the left. Never, at least what bumps it up. So when you're saying, well, we could have emphasized it more better with the workers. Yeah, you could have emphasized better, but at least you're talking about it. There's nothing that's being talked about on the self-employed. Everybody doesn't want to be a worker. Just going back to the conversation I had a minute ago, and just bear with me here, but it's going to kind of explain why I see things on both sides. I was telling you the story about my grandmother and grandfather. She got an abusive relationship she got with my grandfather, the only grandfather that I've known. Both my grandfathers on my maternal and my maternal and paternal side, their names are Thomas. Both my grandmothers on my maternal and paternal side, their names are Joyce. So Joyce and Thomas Taylor were the entrepreneurs. That was the beauty shop. My grandfather owned a mechanic shop that provided for his family. My grandmother, Joyce and Thomas Figaro, where my grandfather Figaro retired from the Air Force. He worked at the post office twice. He went in, retired, went back. My grandmother worked in the school cafeteria and drove the bus. So they were state employees. So I had, growing up every other weekend, I was either watching the entrepreneurs on my mother's side or the workers on my dad's side. Both of those things can happen. I've seen the benefit of both of those things happening at the same time. When I went to the Air Force, I didn't want to retire in the Air Force. I got in, I got what I wanted, and I got out. Everybody's job, everybody doesn't want to be a worker, work for someone and get in a union and fight the boss and there's some people, and most Black people that I know, me personally, not overall, most Black people that I know that work at all have a side hustle, a business, a dream, a something. that they're also trying to push. And it's not just because, Bree, they want to get out of the oppressive worker society. It just may be something that they just enjoy doing. My sister's a teacher. She's been a teacher for 25 years. She's starting a boutique on the side. No one talks to her about what does it mean to get her business going? What does it mean to her to, have independence? Independence is not always, we're going to force them to give us more. Some of us, and most of us in the Black community, go take what's ours. And that is why if the Republicans ever get that right, they will pull a whole lot of Black voters. They will pull more Killer Mikes than Bernie could ever pull a Killer Mike, because on looking at what he does daily, it's entrepreneurship. And that is something that the Democrat side, established side, they do more than the progressive side, nearly not enough.
Yeah, but it's also, it's just so superficial when the Democrats do it. I mean, they throw paltry amount of coins, and they make a website that says like the Black Entrepreneurship Plan that doesn't do anything. The PPP loans didn't go to any Black business. My mom started her own business. I'm a small business owner. I'm a job creator, but I don't, it doesn't feel like any of that is really, I hear your point. I'm not disagreeing with you at all. Yeah, but it is frustrating that the Democrats get so much credit for doing so little in that respect.
Well, for me, I don't give them credit at all. They need to, they don't talk about it at all to me. They talk about, hey, right now the conversation is, hey, let's just make sure Trump is out. Let's just make sure we got to get fascism out. We got to get do it just because we say to do it. So they're terrible at it. I'm just saying the progressives don't do it at all, literally. And I know people that benefited from the PPP loan, but that's just one of many things. But I started the ambassador program in Central Florida at the African American Chamber of Commerce. So I'm just speaking from what I have heard Black business folk feel completely homeless, because if they really align with what works for their business, it's probably going to lean more moderate or more right. But they don't want to be a part of the Republican Party. So who grabs those folks up? Like who gets those folks? And 90% of them are one employee of self-employed. So they're still working somewhere. So how can you marry those two things and not just all be $15 an hour?
Part of me is torn here, because while I certainly appreciate a desire for people to do what makes them happy and pursue whatever creative endeavor or sell whatever it is that they love to do and make what they want to make, so much of what would support that effort are things like not having to worry about healthcare. Not worry about having to pay your employer's healthcare, which is the number one expense for small businesses, and also not having to worry about, can I actually leave my job and commit to this thing that I prefer doing? No, because I have to keep drawing health insurance from my mainstream employer.
No doubt.
And another part of it is me realizing that some part of of hustle culture is organic, but another part of hustle culture is so many people not being paid sufficient wages at their primary job. And a lot of people would love to have one job. Maybe it's not, maybe they prefer their hustle job over their main job as their real job. But the point of which is most people who are working these multiple jobs are doing so because the first one just isn't enough. And so I am resisting it. You're not doing this, but I'm resisting anybody who might hear this and frame this as an either or, like de-emphasize $15 minimum wage or de-emphasize Medicare for all and make, and have a completely different message for entrepreneurs. Because I do think that entrepreneurs benefit from a lot of these programs as well.
Absolutely. And if it's framed that way, and I'm glad you're making it clear that we're not saying either or. We're talking about the beauty of, how that conversation can be had. The way you just framed it with healthcare, I never hear it framed that way on the left.
It's true.
Had they said that, it'd make my staffing firm that I started in Orlando, Florida, I started being laid off, and I was laid off at a staffing firm at the end of 2007. I was going through a divorce, had a 3-month-old baby. I said, I'm going to do this for myself. There wasn't an opportunity to go do it for anybody else because literally nobody was hiring. I had 300 employees 2 years later. We had to shut down the business because healthcare reform kicked in and we could not afford, our rates had to go up to say, how are we going to cover healthcare? So I had to shut down my business, which was employing people who had criminal backgrounds that could not get employment other places. I gave them an opportunity. It was employing single moms that were living in shelters. My business did so much for folks. Even people who had PhDs were just transitioning and just needed temporary work because it was a temporary staffing firm. It did so much for the community. And I had to shut down because of healthcare reform. Healthcare reform actually hurt my business. Although everybody was getting healthcare, it hurt the business owner, which is why you see the right saying, no, it's going to hurt our business. But when it's framed like you're saying, well, if everybody could get health care outside of work, that burden is not on me. So my business actually could thrive. Or a lot of business people don't like it because they want, using the other side of it, they want the person to be tied to them, indebted to them like a slave, just to keep the health care. So I get, it makes the market more competitive when you're able to bounce around and say, I can just work where I want to work and I don't have to be tied to healthcare. So that's an absolute great way to frame it. But that conversation is never had on the left. It's just, this is just what we need to do. And that's just it, because people need healthcare. And that's just it. They never, to me, from my experience working on the campaign, dig deep to say, how do we have these other conversations? I broke my ankle 2 years ago. Private hospital was $27,000. I've told people this on the left. Start talking about the Medicare for alls that are not called Medicare for alls on the county level that actually works. At that particular time, I was in Houston, Texas. Harris County Health was the best breed coverage that I've ever had, including in the military. It was a county funded system. It was the first time I ever went to the doctor and they tested me for everything without me having a problem. I was shocked when I went in. She said, let's run your blood work. Let's get an echo on your heart. Let's do all these different things. In the private way, it was always, I have to have a complaint first 50 times before you actually try to see the problem. Because it was county funded and it wasn't tied to, we just want to keep making money off of, every time. It was actually the first time I actually got true health care. I found out my potassium was low. I found out my iron was low. I found out my vitamin D was low. Now I've lost 32 pounds as a result of good health care from a county system. To fix my ankle with 6 screws that I broke, by the way, after a hit about Bernie Sanders. It was so ironic. I was doing a hit when he had his heart attack. That was the day that I broke my ankle.
Oh, no.
Yeah. I mean, literally, I was talking to him having a heart attack, walked out the studio and slipped and I broke my ankle.
Oh, my goodness.
But that cost, I had to switch from one county, Fort Bend, to Harris Health, and it cost me $50. I couldn't even get anybody to do self-pay in Fort Bend County. And it was $27,000 to go to the emergency room for that one day. And I didn't even leave with a spleen. So those are the type of conversations that should be had at the root to say, listen, healthcare, we can show you that Medicare for all would work, because let's look at Harris County. My boyfriend I told you about, closest friend to me that was paralyzed 2 years ago. Had he been paralyzed in Houston, he would have never been able to stay in rehab for 2 years. He's been in rehab for 2 years because he got hurt in LA County. LA County, LA Care is a Medicare for all policy. To me, when you are explaining it that way, to say, let's point to show how this works instead of just, this is why we need it. Let's show how it works for the small business. Let's show how it's going to work for you as a person. Instead of just sticking to these bullet point talking points, I think it will start to make a difference for folks to have to say, oh, okay, I see what you're saying. At least that's what I try to do when I talk about Medicare for all.
I think you're right. I think you're right. And I think that's all very, very insightful. The one other thing I wanted to just pick up on from what you were saying earlier about the way the left frames things to Black voters and entrepreneurship is my other hesitation, even though I'm like 90% of the way with you, is that there is an aspect of hustle culture. You mentioned Donald Trump being in so many hip hop songs. That is, I'm not sure
that is healthy,
entirely productive. Yes.
Yeah. No question. No question about it.
So there's a part of me that like I believe it is true that there are many people, Black people, who emphasize entrepreneurship and the idea of being able to basically compete at the white man's game, who don't want to disrupt the system, who just want to succeed within the system that exists. And I think that there are people like, Boots Riley and other kind of conscious rappers who have said that their alternate kinds of rap, alternative kind of messages that were appealing to folks just weren't played as much by radio stations, and that there has been a cultivation of a certain kind of hustle culture intentionally among Black people because capitalists understand the extent to which it serves their interests. And other kinds of cultural traditions that are much more communal in nature have been de-emphasized by the people who run record companies, et cetera. So I am a little on the fence about the extent to which we should be appealing in the short term to that entrepreneurial instinct.
Yeah. And I'm not
in the long term working to kind of reframe what our priorities are.
Yeah, it's definitely not appealing because it's not about changing trying to change the trajectory of the overall core fundamental values of the progressive movement, which is pretty much anti-capitalism. It's about understanding that everybody is not the same and on board with that, and understanding those different lived experiences. First of all, everybody's not an entrepreneur. Everybody's not a business owner. Most people suck at it.
Very few people are, to be honest.
Right.
Of any demographic.
Most people suck at it. You work way more hours than what you would working. People get it confused. For 20 years, I didn't make $1, and I finally made $1 in my 21st year. I tell people, when I coach people, and I say, what if I tell you that you're going to have to do the same thing that you're doing right now for $15 for 15 years and never make a profit? Would you do it? Most say no. So I am very well aware that the reason why people get into, entrepreneurship is not for the right reasons necessarily, and can ultimately be very toxic. And so when I'm coaching people, what I do is because of my passion and my calling. And God just allowed me to be able to make a living on it after 15 years of not making a living on it, because I didn't have a choice. Most people don't do that. They go back to the workforce. They go back and work. They give up and say, okay, forget it. So I'm with you there. We are saying the same thing. What I'm saying is that to ignore the other part, it's not about appealing or changing the core structure, to say that I'm only running my own business because, not you're saying that, but to folks, that I'm only because I am caught up in this capitalist society, and they're making me do it because it's all about the money and it's this and that, would just simply not be true. Because to me, what has, in my lived experience, a woman being able to take care of myself, who is not paid the same as a white woman, who is not paid the same as a black man, is not paid the same as a white man. To me, not being able to take care of yourself from where I come from means abusive relationships, means having to be a stripper. No shout out, no disrespect to any strippers who choose to do that, but I'm just telling where I come from. Dating hustle. I dated hustlers growing up. Being with the dope man, getting caught with his work, going to prison, getting your ass beat. Like, these were real consequences of me not knowing how to make a living for myself. And I could not always depend on someone giving me a job. I got my college. It took me over a decade to get my college degree. I had to sell. I had to use my mouth. Getting a job at Geico. When I got my first job at Geico, as a first real adult job, the first one job that I ever had to work without having to work a side hustle, that was owned by Warren Buffett, one of the most wealthiest men in the world. And I learned for the very first time, and it's so interesting when I tell people this, because he ran Geico like a socialism organization. A lot of people don't understand that. When we worked at Geico, which is one reason why I left, because I wanted to get sales for what I did, not have to share the wealth. Every sale that we did, if we sold them and they hung up and called right back, whoever they got on the phone got the sale, not me, even though I put in all the work, which is why I left and went to AT&T at the time. But he ran that organization where everybody had to pitch in. We had a shared sales. We had to recycle our folders and all this different type of stuff. And at the end of the year, it wasn't necessarily to make him more wealthy, but it made us more wealthy. It was the first time, Bree, that I got a profit sharing check of 21%. I took that cash money. I paid off my car. It's the first time I ever got a lump sum of money. So I learned a lot from that organization. And so I'm just saying that the reality of what we want it to be versus the reality of what it is what is missing on the left. And it's more of a preach. No, you should just be this way because this is the right way, and not enough dealing with the reality of where we are right now. Two things can be done at the same time. We can still push forward to where it is not a slave trade, a slave drive, at the same time of understanding that everybody that wants their own is not necessarily because I don't have any other choice. This was actually my choice, and respect my choice that I want to run my own business and I want to create and I want to be a creator, and those things matter too. And so I just think that just gets ignored. And it's not saying that the Democrat side does it better. I don't think anybody has mastered it yet.
Hey, YouTube. Thanks for watching. Just a reminder that this is a podcast. You can catch an extra premium episode every Monday for $5 a month at patreon.com/badfaithpodcast. That's patreon.com/badfaithpodcast for $5 a month, an extra episode every week. Additionally, please do consider liking this video, subscribing to this channel. It helps us out. It helps independent media beat the algorithm. We appreciate you. And as always, keep the faith.